Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on what the new building safety regulator will mean for social housing. I'm sure everybody here is aware of what the building safety regulator is and what it's going to do, but just for anyone who needs reminding, the regulator is part of the structure that Dame Judith Hackett set out in her review of building regulations, and is going to have three main functions when it's set up. That's overseeing the safety and performance of buildings, helping and encouraging the built environment industry and building control professionals to improve their competence, and leading the implementation of the new regulatory framework for high-rise buildings. But really sitting behind that is an effort to instill a new culture of safety and compliance and move away from the circumstances which gave us the Grenfell Tower fire and the resulting cladding crisis. The changes the new regulator and the new system enforces brings will be profound for the social housing sector. It's meant to instill a new way of doing business. And I think that's one that many have already begun embedding, but everyone in the sector needs to be aware of what changes this is going to make for their businesses and their professional lives. Discuss. I am joined by four excellent panelists with a wide range of experience. We're going to hear first from Jane Duncan, who is chair of the Expert Advisory Group on Safety at the Royal Institute of British Architects. And has been quite an important voice in the post-Grenfell landscape of how we need to change and move forward. Jane is a director of her award-winning consultancy, Jane Duncan Architects, and she's been awarded an OBE for services to increasing diversity in architecture. We're also going to hear from Gavin Creech, who is product manager at K Systems, who are a leading manufacturer of external wall insulations, who is Director of Energy and Programme Management at the Housing Association, WH. Paul leads actually the National Housing Federation's group of 15 experts who work on building safety in the sector and make suggestions and bring together best practice. And finally, we'll hear from Sue Dunphy from For Housing. Sue's worked in safety and compliance for more than a decade, and she is currently head of building and customer safety at For Housing, which owns 24,000 homes, mostly in and around Greater Manchester, including many high-rises. So it's a panel of four speakers who've got a wide range of expertise and experience in this area, and I hope we're all going to get a lot from hearing from what they've got to say. They're all going to give presentations in a moment, at the end of which we'll have time for some question and answers. So please do jot down anything you want to ask, put it into the chat box, or just make a note of it, and I'll make sure that the panel gets to respond to your points at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jane.
Thank you. Oh, there we are. That's a picture of me. That's good. So I'm going to start the slides. Just to introduce me, I am the chair of the expert panel on fire safety at the RIBA, because Grenfell Tower fire happened while I was still president, and I set the panel up. And 4.5 years later, sadly, we're still there. Things have not got any easier, I don't think. But hopefully in the future they will. So what's happening at the moment? Well, for the construction industry, and really that is my voice in this arena, we actually have a juggernaut coming for us. The impact is enormous, and the problems are potentially also enormous, as well as all the fantastic opportunities that this new regime will offer. So for us, we've got the Building Safety Bill impact. It's enormous. It covers the whole industry. Competence requirements for everybody in the industry are going to have to be shifted up several gears, which means we need retraining. We're all going to have to look at accreditation. RIBA is looking at masses of CPD and has done for the past few years, really to improve the fire safety knowledge of our architects. We do need some clarity, though. We have had we've been promised secondary legislation with the bill. That's the bit that's got all the detail in that we need to see. And then we need to make sure that the new roles are understood and what is our position for all of us within that role, including, as you know, the building safety manager, which is going to impact listeners today. Let's move on. Well, the headline provisions are relatively straightforward. It's a new regime for high-risk, high-rise buildings. There's a new golden thread, so everybody's information should be held digitally and passed on so that there's never any question about how do you maintain safety, particularly compliance with building regulations and fire safety. One of the things that a lot of people in the construction industry don't seem to realise that the fundamental changes in the built environment sector actually involve all buildings, but there are additional requirements for higher risk buildings. And there's a certain height which has been set 18 meters, and that's going to be included in the high risk areas. So what about my industry? Well, we have a number of problems. Here's just three. One is exclusions for insurance. Since Grenfell Tower, architects and others in the industry, professionals, have found it very difficult to get PI cover, professional indemnity insurance, because, of course, insurers run a mile for many risks. And the box of risks, Pandora's box of risks, was opened at Grenfell Tower. Shoveling off risk, there's no question that we all have to join together. We have to collaborate to reduce risks, not just assume somebody else is taking them. Particularly the clients, I'm sure, including yourselves. We need to literally give a kick on the backside to construction industry and really commit to better competence, better clarity, which we need also from the government, and collaboration with everybody from top to bottom. That sounds great. It's incredibly difficult to achieve, I think. So what's actually happened since Grenfell? It's 4.5 years, some building regulation changes, just a few, not yet mandatory in terms of sprinklers. Stay put, there've been changes put forward, but they're not mandatory. The Fire Safety Act, of course, is one that's going to impact social housing with fire risk assessments required. And that came into force in August 21, but the building safety regulator, who's supposed to be supervising this, has not yet got the approval system clearly established. And one thing that's coming back for us is that we know that a design specification is going to be needed. So we need to be prepared. The oversight from the regulator it sounds fantastic. We're absolutely behind this, where the regulator has these three key functions to oversee safety and performance of buildings. Well, that's a job and a half. To encourage the built environment industry to improve their competence, and we're right at the forefront of that. We've been moving for the last, well, since the middle of 2018 to establish this within our own profession. And he's going to be leading the implementation of a new regulatory framework for high-rise buildings. It's quite a reduced number of buildings, and we are concerned that it should be wider. We should really think safety first for everything. So the big issue for us as the RIBA is that neither the bill nor the regulator removes the need for really prescriptive building regulations and guidance. If you've been listening to the inquiry this week, you'll know why I'm saying this. There is an urgent review needed for approved document B. It's not clear, it is ambiguous, and lots of people have been playing the field. So we need a level playing field now. And this is just to describe what professionals within the industry are looking at. Conflicting information, fire codes, standards, other guidance, all used with desktop studies by very clever fire engineers to trump what it actually tells us within the regulations we need to do. And look at all this paperwork. This is from the desk of one technical architect. We can't be expected to have to go through all that. Competence is very, very important. I think that's probably one of the main things that this new regulator is going to have to be looking at. Competence, everybody within the system. And the real key here is what, from my perspective, we're doing at the RIBA, which is we've put in a completely new education and professional development framework. It's already en route, CPD is already en route, and we have mandatory competences. Everybody who is a member of the RIBA has to go through this mandatory confidence for health and life safety. And I'm just going to hold this up. I don't know whether you can see this. The RIBA has published this document, which is the Guide to Health and Safety. And frankly, anybody can read it. It's brilliant. And I'm not just saying it, I didn't write it either. So these are the key things for today for me: smart contract documents and smarter procurement processes, because these actually have had a huge impact on the whole of the outturn of what's been happening in the last 15 years. If you want your designers to offer, and others to offer, proper professional life services and advice and work with your principal contractors, we need to think about various different things. Firstly, within the regulations, the draft Building Safety Bill doesn't cover duties of inspection of construction work, only coordination of design and coordination of construction work, not inspection. So there is a PAS being considered at the moment, which is going to set out how inspection ought to be carried out and by whom. But without that, how is somebody supposed to be able to sign off a building? I don't know that. But the last point is very important for this morning, which is to do with the cost of building work. If you pay peanuts, you lose quality, you lose any potential forms of ensuring that your building is safe. It's dangerous. We have to somehow or other stop this aggressive cost-focused procurement route where the cheapest is the best. It is not. Cheap is not. You wouldn't do it in your own house. You wouldn't go ride an aeroplane where they haven't spent enough money to make it safe. Please reconsider. Thank you. So have we got, beg your pardon, I managed to do two there. Have we got the wherewithal to stop this juggernaut coming and knocking us over? Well, from my perspective, it means we can regain public trust and respect. And we need to do a lot as an industry. Improve our competence. We need to be able to ensure we can get proper insurance, otherwise nobody's going to take the roles. We need reliable product information. As you know, that hasn't been the case all the time. And we definitely need clients and others in this sector to think about, to consider smarter procurement. The RIBA has actually written documentation on this if you need help. So what do we all need to do? And that's everybody. We've got to step up a bit here. We need higher standards of competence, responsibility, and, to be honest, industry leadership. So if we don't do it now, when the heck are we going to ever do it? So let's have a discussion about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. This is a very powerful and detailed presentation. We can now move on to Gavin from K Systems. Gavin, over to you.
To the introduction there. Actually, what I was going to cover here was some specific examples, and it kind of echoes what Jane was just talking about there, actually, in terms of some of the aspects we see as a system designer of how the building regulations and this golden thread of information works on the ground, and especially in relation to the competence as well. So what I wanted to talk about today was really looking at a few specific examples of where we step in as system designer and kind of look at some of the impact of the building safety regulator and what that hopefully will deliver in the longer term and kind of what we're looking for from that. I hope you'll indulge me enough to start with, because I thought I'd start with looking at what actually is a system designer. Depending on your experience of working in construction and dealing with facades, it might not always be obvious. I think one of the obvious questions that always gets asked is, are they components or a full system? And really, it's a full system that a system designer would be producing, supplying, and being responsible for. So typically, they're actually towards the bottom of the supply chain, but really a really critical and important part of the golden thread of information. They're designing the system from the wall out. So if you look at the example to the side, there's a typical masonry wall that could be steel frame. From that point outwards with, say, in this case, insulation and then a render, or that could be a brick finish, that would be the systems designer's responsibility to pull the design together and work with installers to make sure they know how to install that in the first place. The level of liability and responsibility, though, is not quite as strong as maybe it could be. And I think that highlights what Jane was saying there as well. So what does a system designer do? They provide the aesthetic and finish. There's also a requirement to produce the fire performance certification that is absolutely critical to that golden thread of information, as well as look at third-party accreditation as well. So typically that could be BBA, that could be BDA, that could be CWCT, lots of acronyms, but there are many routes depending on the facade system itself. And it's not down to just the individual components. Those would be for the system as a whole, to ensure that the whole system is going to be compliant with the regulations and give clarity for any fire officers or anyone further up the chain to make sure that they are compliant with the regulations of what they need to provide. So the system designers also typically will be using approved contractors. It's a specific skill to install these systems. So the system designer will typically supply to a specific contractor that's able to do that, who would be somewhere in the chain reporting up to the primary contractor. That would involve things like site support and also site inspections. So what Jane said there, the systems designers will always do some level of site inspections. For high-rise, that can be weekly, that could even be more depending on the project itself. The issue is that is mainly for their own liability. So in terms of provision of warranty for these systems, that's why those inspections are happening. But obviously there's a valuable source of information that is being gathered there, which obviously has been relevant to some of the retrofit work that's required at the moment where facades are needing remedial work done. So what does the building safety regulator mean for social housing? Well, there's three key responsibilities that regulator has. Overseeing the safety and performance of the building. So that's going to have a direct impact on the products that are being used in there. So for system designers, that's going to impact what we provide and how we form that system to provide the facade and the finish that people want. They are responsible for helping and encouraging the built environment industry to build and control professionals to improve their competence. And there's an example which I'll go on to in a bit more detail, because as a system designer, we can see the variations. We're dealing with multiple building safety officers, fire officers, building control in various regions, and there's clear variability in terms of how some of the regulations are being interpreted and where there are gaps, how those are being fulfilled. They're also responsible for leading implementation of new regulatory framework for high-rise buildings, and obviously that is going to be a welcomed addition to the current change in requirements we had most recently. So we've already had the requirements amended in terms of fire performance, that all the products should conform to A1 or A2 S1D0, which are specific fire requirements for the systems themselves, not for the individual products. It's a system as a whole. But there is still room to improve with this. And a lot of that does relate to this competence and clarity within the testing programs and the specific systems and designs. There are a number of different routes to compliance. The fire testing is obviously very clear. But when it comes then to third-party accreditation, which is Agrimol, that could be CWCT or full-scale testing, there are differing requirements based on the experience of the local officers or the building control that are involved in the projects themselves. And that's where any kind of issues around compliance leading to delays, leading to levels of confusion or uncertainty are what we could do with moving away from in the industry. So these changes will be welcome that should be coming down the road. When there's words in the regulations that say can provide confidence or may accept, there's a bit of an open route for products and systems to get through, or at least lead to a level of interpretation which we could do with closing off. So really then, what does that mean for tenants and social housing overall? Well, the new safety bill, it's been introduced. We're waiting for that to achieve royal assent. Specific to products and systems, within 12 months, it would be expected that the new regulator should be implementing secondary legislation regarding the regulator powers, regarding specifically the products used in facade systems. And then after 18 months, to strengthen the requirements for the construction products themselves. So I think I would echo kind of what Jane was saying there. These changes need to come. They should be coming. And it's kind of quite clear from a system designer's perspective where some of these gaps or lack of clarity is. So we're looking forward to seeing how this progresses and how those can ensure that when people are doing retrofit work on social housing projects, that the path and that golden thread of information is absolutely clear, and there's no difference in region or in specific people working on projects as to how those are being interpreted. And really for the residents then, as soon as they get better information and they start seeing the information come through to them in terms of the information that's provided in the buildings when that comes through, so they will see what the risk assessments are and how the performance of the facades are working for them, then that can only help to instill confidence to make sure that everyone is clear that the regulations are going in the right direction and that people are aware that their buildings are safe and give them the clarity that they need. That's all I've got to say for the moment on that. So thanks ever so much for your time, and I'll hand over.
Thank you very much for that one, Gavin. I should please remind everyone as these presentations are coming in, there's lots of interesting points being made. If you've got questions, please can you stick them into that Q&A box, so we've got some lined up for our speakers when we get to the end of the presentations. I'll now move on to Paul Dockerell from WHG. So Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Pete. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Paul Dockerell. Better put my slide on. Bear with me. There we go. So there we go. I'm Paul Dockerell. I'm the Director of Energy and Programme Management at WHG. We're a housing provider based predominantly in Walsall in the West Midlands. We've got a 20,000 housing stock. We've got 17 high-rise blocks and 600 low-rise blocks. And what I want to talk about is what does the new building safety regulator mean for social housing. So if we think about the sector view first, so there are a lot of challenges ahead in understanding safety and performance systems for all buildings. The only way we're going to get through this is if we work as a collective, and that's other stakeholders as well, such as construction, fire and rescue services, those kind of partners. But it's a challenge that we have to meet under the bill, and it's something we can do much smarter if we work together and actually share best practice and share our own journeys in where we're going and what we're doing. And I'm hoping to provide some insight into that in my presentation. So we're already a regulated sector, so we understand this environment really, really well. So we should be able to live in it, we should be able to comply and satisfy what is required. We are already accountable, responsible organisations, and the challenge is certainly not beyond our capabilities. We do understand this environment. We provide safe and well-maintained homes for our residents. Compliance and safety have always been our priorities. So again, those are the credentials of the sector and what it does to provide safe homes for people. And that's things, like gas, asbestos, Legionella, all those things that we have to make sure that we comply with, and fire risk assessments and that kind of thing. So the sector does need to think about its relationship with residents. I'm not going to go into that into too much detail, but this is where collaboration with residents is valuable. We'll gain a lot more knowledge from talking to our residents, understanding how they feel about things. And what we need to change in terms of that sort of culture is we need to stop being a teacher and treating our residents as pupils. We need to balance that right out, and everybody's got equal voice at a collaboration or a talking event. I think that's really important to melt that down and get that right to make sure that that we are sort of complying to what's required. So thinking about what the team should be, how we build the team to deliver for the sector, then sorry, I'm just going to move my mic away. I beg your pardon if that's not come across too good. So one of the things we must think about is what our building safety team should look like. So additional resources will be needed But a lot of the team already exists within the organisation. So you need to look at current experience and colleagues to see what that looks like. So what does the building safety group look like within an organisation? Most will have health and safety groups. There may be subgroups to building safety. And how does that sort of work within the organisation to cover sort of wider aspects of building safety risk? So not just fire risk assessment, but wider context, and how that team can be dedicated and prepared for delivering on the building safety bill. Resident engagement groups are really, really important. As I say, I think organisations need to work with residents on many things, really. So we do that already. We look at employment, social value, procurement, and we need to develop those relationships even more, because not only have we got building safety to think about, we've got decarbonisation strategies to think about as well. In terms of external stakeholders, we need to think about external partners such as fire and rescue service, local authorities, contractors particularly, designers and suppliers, and what contribution they can offer to your organisation to help with this journey. They've got lots of experience, they've got lots of knowledge, they're on the same journey in slightly different ways, but they're very, very important to make sure that we're working together. Two examples for us that's worked really, really well. We've worked with TPAS and we've worked with ACO, and they've really helped us with understanding their strategies, not just how to fit different component parts within the building, not just how to talk to residents, but to understand what their future strategies look like and actually embrace what they're trying to do. We can recruit competency, and we can pay a lot of money for that competency, but we can also develop the existing workforce and the work teams. We've got a lot of experience already there, so how do we then develop that competency? And while you're thinking about that, we know resources are quite thin on the ground for building safety managers and things like that. But one of the challenges is also to think about succession planning within your organisation and making sure you've got the teams coming through who are also learning about building safety. And once you've established your team, ensure it is qualified or on a journey for qualification. So it's understanding and making sure the teams are ready, so that when we start to do building safety cases, talk to the regulator, engage with residents, what does that qualification look like for your team? So what we've tried to do, this is where we've gone at WHG, this is what we've tried to do. It starts with having passionate leadership, making sure this is a really interesting subject. It's a very important one, as we know, but it's about driving to be proactive. It's no good waiting and sitting back and waiting for things to happen and maybe buy things later on, just in time. We need to really be upfront. And earlier in the year, having the chance to speak to Peter Baker himself, we talked about active leadership. What does that look like? And that's getting out onto sites. That's getting out onto working with residents and understanding what actually is going on. And just making things happen. Make sure you've got leadership that wants to make things happen. We reinvented our fire risk assessment safety group into the building safety group and made sure we've got representation from the business on what that means to other parts of the business, whether that's development, residents, and what employment opportunities also look like. And what we looked at as well was, and what we changed within those teams was, what does that look like holistically? So it's not just fire, it's about building incidents, what happens to the whole building, making sure we've got holistic risk assessments around the building itself. And then we can understand what safety really, really looks like for us as an organisation. We're also recruiting for 2 building safety managers at the moment. So by the new year, we'll have 2 new building safety managers in the team. We will also make sure they work with the current resources, the current teams that we've got in place, and make sure that we're delivering, our commitments, but they need to be part of the team delivering the work, not just an individual person working on an individual building. We want to promote proactive goal culture across the team. So everybody has contribution, and as I say, particularly our residents. And also we've got really good support from our exec and our board, and making sure they understand what we're trying to achieve and what we're trying to deliver. And also we've developed really good digital enhancements of our buildings. So all our 17 high-rise blocks are digitally twinned. So that's a really good visual aid, not just internally to the business, but also to contractors, residents and other people that can actually look at their building and really understand the safety features of it. And that really helps to get that trusting message across to say, why is your building safe? And in turn, that also feeds the building safety case, which we're working on with the joint regulatory group at this minute in time. So finally, I think as a sector, we've grown it. It's not going to go away, and we've got to get on with it. But I think the more we can work together, the better we can share insights with each other, and we can make the journey shorter, but we can also make it of a quality nature because we'll work together and share best practice. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. I thought that was a very helpful, practical presentation. And now we're going to move to our final speaker, Sue Dunphy from For Housing. So, Sue, over to you.
I'm sure when you're just listening to the other panellists and Pete, we could talk and discuss this topic for hours on end. It's something that we've been working on for a while now, but I'd very much like to talk you through some of For Housing's new measures for further improvement on building safety and the importance of tenant engagement to create safe places to live with tenants' involvement in decision making. So as we know, the Building Safety Bill was introduced to give tenants and owners more rights, powers and protection following the Grenfell tragedy in 2017. At For Housing, we have a strong foundation of excellent standards of safety in place, but in the aftermath of Grenfell, we wanted to do more. So For Housing was one of the first to install sprinklers in all high-rise buildings, which offered extra protection and reassurance to tenants so that they could feel safer in their homes. In future, myself and my team will be dedicated to making further improvements to safety across high-rise blocks and working closely with our tenants when making such decisions. Building safety is everybody's responsibility, and we do believe that at For Housing, and we have a passionate leadership team that supports this approach. So at For Housing, we want to be the best landlord that we can and putting the tenants at the heart of everything we do. And working together, we do feel this is key. So my role as Head of Building and Customer Safety at For Housing is a newly created position, and this is part of the For Housing proactive approach in preparing for the new safety bill that we know is due to be implemented at some point in 2023. Prior to this, I was strategic lead for health and safety, and I think it was going back to what Paul was saying before, that health and safety does very much link in to building safety. So I'm currently leading the team responsible for 17 high-rise buildings, 12 in Salford and 5 in Knowsley. And we have recently taken over the handover of phase 1 of Dock 5. That means that my team are also managing the building safety of that brand new build. So we took the decision, again, a bit like Paul, to set up our newly formed building safety team with existing colleagues and experience from staff already working, not just in our high-rise blocks, but from other departments across the organisation, including health and safety.
I think we seem to have lost Sue. My technical colleagues are working in the background to try and get her back on. I think in the meantime, I might begin some question and answers so that we're not wasting our time. And when we get Sue back, I'll invite her back on to finish her presentation. So I have one question, and please do remember to put any queries, anything you've got for our panelists into the box. I have a question which came in quite early in the session from Ola, which says, has the new building safety regulator issued a regulatory standard similar to those monitored by the regulator for social housing, and what are those standards? I think that specific question is interesting, but I think it's also interesting to hear a little bit about how the BSR might operate and how that would compare to what we're all familiar with the RSH. Paul, I'm going to come to you on this one because I know you said you've spoken to Peter Barker and you might have some insight into that. Is it something you can help Ola with?
Yeah, I think this is part of sort of where we are at the moment. I think in relation to what does the regulator model look like? How's that going to work? I think, there's a start with sort of a really good start around developing the resident group and what does that look like and getting residents involved. I think that's really key priority, and I think that's absolutely spot on. But I think all the other things are starting to follow through. And I think until we get to, there's a transition period between now and ascension of the bill and it being actually law. I think there's that period where the regulator will need to sort of build the team, to build the processes. And I think the standards that we require and develop will emerge, will become more visual at that point. I think there's a lot of work already existing in the bill to allow the sector and other sectors to be involved and start to develop. It's a really good opportunity to feed back in to the process, to the regulator about what are we doing, because if we sit and wait, it's really hard work for the regulator to actually do everything. I think what we need to do is collaborate and sort of offer what we think is good practice and share that with them, so that then they can put standards in place that are required. And there are a number of working groups already developing the various standards around competency and that kind of thing. So I think it's still a journey, but I think it won't be far off over the next 6 months to see some of these things be refined and actually be publicised.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks for that, Paul. I'm also do need to apologise for this slightly crackly sound when Paul's speaking, which some of you might have heard. I hope it's not too much of a disturbance. I'm picking up another question from Thomas Lawler, which is put in the chat. And do feel free to say, by the way, in there when you're posting these questions, what organisation you're from, if you don't mind doing that. But Thomas has asked, I think, quite a pertinent question. Does the panel think the building safety regulator will struggle to source the expertise it requires to fulfil its proposed functions when there is a known shortage of these skills in the country? Obviously, it's a public sector organisation. It's going to have to get some of these staff from the private sector, and it's never been an easy task. That, Jane, do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think that it's going to be able to skill up and do the job it needs to do?
Well, there's no question it has to skill up. Will it find it difficult to find the right people? Probably not, but the real question is, what does he need? There are a lot of skilled people within this industry, within a whole range of different organisations. But this is probably one of the most difficult jobs, I think, to take on this oversight role. And so people need to be not only experienced, but they also need probably to have special training. And I think, like other things, the BSB, has got that potential to train people in the same way as the professionals and the contractors and everybody else, and suppliers themselves have to upskill, and it has to be done by everybody. I think, will it find it difficult? Good question, Thomas. I think it is very difficult, but I do think we have a lot of skills. We just need to know what else is going to be required. But until we've got the detail of what the building safety regulator is doing and what is expected from other people, so that he knows what is the oversight that's required, I don't think you're going to know the answer exactly. But I do think we will be able to do it. It's a matter of being reasonable with all these things. The entire industry has got to pick itself up and think about the way it works and do things better. It isn't an overnight process. I dare say it's going to be an awful long time before things change to being the way they really ought to be. But in that time, let's train some people up.
Thank you, Jane. There's a question coming specifically for you, Sue. If we actually, I was about to ask that, forgetting that I'm not sure whether or not we've got Sue back yet, but I'll ask instead Alan's question. It's Alan Catterick, who has asked us about new builds and why the design architects are not held responsible for the compliance of building regulations until the completed building is handed over from the builder to the client. For retrofit works, this will mean the need for trained qualified persons who will be responsible for establishing such a programme. I think, Jane, you've just finished speaking, but it's an architecture question. It's probably best to come back to you on that. Do you have views on that, why for new builds it's the design architects not held responsible until the completed building is handing over? And is that a change that would be beneficial?
I think that we've gone through a process in the last, 15 or 20 years where the architects in the main have been used for very specific purposes, which are to get planning consents, sometimes to do construction packages and hand over to the main contractor to take on the work. And they don't have a further role. And particularly, they don't have an independent oversight role, which means that they can't be responsible for compliance, except for the work that they've done. So it's all to do with the contract and the appointment that the architect has. I know that under the new Building Safety Bill, this is going to change, particularly as I feel it's pushing everybody towards thinking about who's going to take the role of principal designer, who has a responsibility right through to the end of the project. And that includes inspections and getting the right help and being able to sign off. And I know that there's quite a lot of pushing to get architects, who are the lead designers, to take over the principal designer role. And I think it's the right thing, frankly. I think it's exactly what we used to have. And I'm old enough to remember when that was. But I do think we need to get back to the point where you've got one set of design requirements that come from the client's desired brief and outcomes. That's including the stakeholders, so everybody knows where they're starting from, they know when they need to end up, and to get between one and the other, you need the golden thread. And one of the best ways of keeping that golden thread going is by having the same professional team making sure that things are happening all the way through and signing off at the end. It would be my great wish that this is the way we carry on in the future. But if it's not, the golden thread in itself is a route to make sure that everybody knows what's happened. There needs to be a lot of information at the time at which information is passed over from one party to another, and that will hopefully mean that the golden thread is continued, and whoever is in charge at the end will be able to sign off. There's no question we need sign off. We're one of the few countries that doesn't do this. A lot of other countries expect their architects to follow right the way through and to sign the project off. But we have one issue, and I think it's not just architects, with a lot of youngsters coming into the professions now, and that they don't necessarily go onto site. Contractors haven't always welcomed onto site to inspect. And that is an issue because it means that we've got a lot of education to do with young people coming into the industry so that they know what they're looking for. And the checklist, which hopefully this new PAS is going to come up with, will actually help that. But the point is, we need to do it. We need to make sure that the professionals who are responsible for making the decisions actually follow them through and understand what they are.
Okay, thank you for that, Jane. I am told that Sue is logging back in, so we should be hearing from her again shortly. But there's a question in there from actually, I want to bring Gavin in briefly because we haven't heard from you for a little while, Gavin. And just one of the questions I have, I mean, you're sort of at the coalface in terms of external wall insulation and external wall systems, and obviously that's at the heart of some of this where it started. I just wonder how much change you think there's been within your part of the construction sector. Obviously, the Grenfell Tower inquiry has exposed some pretty alarming things about the certification of products and that sort of thing. How far on do you think that the external wall market is in terms of learning those lessons and making the necessary changes?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. And I would say definitely progress has been made. We see that on a daily basis in terms of a tightening of the requirements we need for third-party Agrimore certification or testing requirements. Those have been increasing over the last couple of years dramatically. Obviously, there's been a significant change in terms of the regulations themselves moving to the A1, A2 scheme for fire ratings. For a lot of people, that didn't actually make a huge impact because that was basically what was being advised for high-rise jobs anyway in at least the most recent years. So that was a welcome addition to actually just give clarity about what was required there. So it was a requirement rather than a recommendation for high-rise buildings. I think there's still further to go, though. And I think that's what we're really looking for the building safety regulator to help support that. When I was talking about clarity, yes, some of those terms now are very clear. And that means when it comes through third-party certification or fire testing, we know what we're testing to. When it then comes through to the more, how would you say, optional areas, one of the examples I had in there on the pictures there was for, say, cavity systems, whereby there's a drainage cavity behind a facade. It's a little bit looser in that area. So there's still room to improve the clarity of what testing is required. So the people within this golden thread know exactly what they're asking for, what test reports they're looking for, and there's no hearsay or uncertainty about what is needed there. So I think my summary is yes, there's still far to go. It has changed a lot. There's still a lot further to go with it.
Thank you, Gavin. Sue, we have you back now. I think you probably had a couple of minutes left of your presentation. But can I ask you also there's a question which has come in for you about the sprinkler program you talked about and whether the, I mean, sorry, 3-year-olds managed to get into the room. So there's a question about what happened with your sprinkler program. Did you get 100% coverage, and what did you ask for a contribution from leaseholders to pay, and how did that go down? Always the thorny question with building safety measures. But do you want to pick that up and then give us a sort of flavour of the last couple of minutes of your presentation that people might have missed as well?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Okay, yes, we did have 100% access for the sprinklers. I think the key to that was the communication and the tenant engagement at the beginning and leaseholder engagement. I think we very much worked with them with question and answers, that reassurance as to why we were doing that. We fitted sprinklers not only in the tenant's flat, but also in the communal areas. But we have very few leaseholders in our high-rise, but yet they were fully engaged, and For Housing paid the cost of that. Okay, and I'm not sure where my presentation ended. Could anybody tell me?
Sorry, technical difficulties, my end. Thank you for that, Sue.
Okay.
So I have a question from Lee Ford. He says, by its nature, there'll be finance made available for building safety and new construction, but is a lack of funding for existing building owners a threat to compliance of the new regulatory regime for the huge swathe of existing housing stock, not just cladding? I think this is a question that's been asked by somebody else as well. This system seems easier to implement for new buildings where you're starting with a clean slate effectively. And as we know, with the cladding crisis ongoing, fixing buildings in the existing stock is a much tougher challenge. Paul, do you want to take that on with WHG? How does this new regime, how do you foresee this new regime implementing your existing stock, and what worries you about it?
Yeah, I think it's a test for any housing association to actually, look at their business planning and what their sort of investment plan looks like for perhaps the next 2 to 5 to 10 years. I think it's going to cause a strain for many organisations, particularly if you've got a lot of sort of cladding replacement works to be done. I know we've got the building safety fund to support that, but anything below 11 metres isn't supported at the moment. And there could be a lot of stock that we're going to encounter there, not particularly for WHG, but for the sector overall. But we've also got decarbonisation to think about. We've also, in 2 years' time, got decent homes too to consider. So if we think back, in 2004, we had heavy investment from the government to help us with decent homes, kitchen and bathrooms and that kind of thing. Well, that is due again now within the next 2 years. But there's a really big strain on expenditure and what investment looks like over the next 2 years. But I think it's up to your exec and your board to decide what are the priorities. The one thing that we won't do is not comply. We will need to find the investment to make sure that we do comply. So there'll be no sort of corners being cut. There'll be no disposal of stock. Our stock is our stock, and we'll be investing in it in the normal way. We just need to find the money, and that will have to be through financing sources or bonding stock or whatever it needs to be. But we need to find the revenue to bring into the business to meet the demand. There's no turning away from it whatsoever.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I have a question. It's kind of two questions, which I might wrap up together actually, because they touch on a similar thing. Matt Bright has asked, is there any clarification on whether the installation of automatic fire suppression systems will be seen as proportionate in some buildings where combustible EWS has been identified? I think we all know it's a reference to the government's attempts to limit the scope of the remediation of high-rise medium-rise buildings, particularly those below the 18-metre threshold. And Kathleen Dale has also asked what approach is being taken on buildings below 18 metres. I mean, I can say before I hand this over to the panel that we know that behind the scenes, in Michael Gove's team, that there is a big focus on continuing what Robert Jenrick tried to do unsuccessfully, and removing some of these systems, some of these buildings out of the sort of pool that are needed for remediation. And there might be funding announcements coming soon around things like fire alarms and sprinklers in order to help lenders have that security to feel like they don't necessarily need to insist on a full remediation being carried out. But Jane, I wanted to ask you for your thoughts on that. I mean, I guess that the EWS question particularly, do you think there might be sprinklers might be an answer as opposed to remediation for some of these buildings? And then more generally, what do you think is the future for medium-rise stock?
Well, there's no question that our expert panel at the RIBA has been questioning why certain things stop at a certain level. And our answer from government has been very much, well, we've got to start somewhere. But I don't actually understand quite why that is. We have got, for example, the the building regulations in Scotland, which have been changed significantly. Wales, for example, decided to have sprinkler systems in all buildings, irrespective of height, since 2016. There's quite a divergence across the devolved nations, and I do think that you have to think about it from the tenant's perspective, from the people who live and work in these buildings. Just because your building is a certain height and doesn't quite make the grade, why should you have a building which is effectively being left? The only thing I would say is that the aim of the Building Safety Bill is to incorporate all buildings, not just the new builds, but all buildings in scope, which means if you're changing a building and it requires building control approval, to be honest, you come under the Building Safety Bill. But I do think it's also really, really key that we as an industry take on board that we don't just need to meet specific regulations. We also need to reassure those people who are, and as Sue has quite rightly set out, the tenants, the people who are going to be living and breathing in those buildings who are now concerned. And they need to be brought into the details, which is why she had access for people to do sprinklers in her buildings. But if there's a possibility of expanding just within the sector without having to wait for the legislation to expand, I think we should try and do it. I think the professionals need to look into it. We need to find cost-effective ways of supplying and fixing buildings. I don't know, though, that we're ever going to really cope with every building. I have significant worries about the fact that huge numbers of buildings have been constructed without being properly inspected, and what's turning up since Grenfell has been quite gruesome, to be honest. I just wish we can get it. We certainly start with new buildings being built properly and supervised properly and signed off properly, and everybody taking responsibility and working together. We have to do exactly the same with existing building stock. I mean, let's face it, the new buildings are a small percentage of the building work. The existing stock is the big stuff, and we've got to sort that. And we've got to sort that no matter what height it is. If it's been built wrong, if it isn't safe, it needs to be put right. And to be honest, the government needs to do something about that.
Yeah, I think certainly we'd all agree with that last point, and perhaps we will be seeing more movement on that in the next couple of weeks when they've all finished talking about Christmas parties and all that sort of thing. We have reached the end of the scheduled time, and I think actually Jane's overview there was quite a good way to wrap our session up. Sue has asked me to say to those of you who missed part of her presentation or were unable to see it, she's happy to send it out, and I think the slides from our other speakers will be available as well. So thank you to everybody for joining. Thank you particularly to Jane, Gavin, Paul and Sue for giving up their time to speak. I certainly took a lot from that session, and I hope everyone attending did as well. So that's all. Hopefully you'll be joining us again for another webinar in the future, and please do get in touch with our speakers or with us if you've got any queries about it. But thank you everyone for joining.